Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of the foXnoMad podcast. I'm your host, foXnoMad Anopolat. My guest today is Fred Finn. He is the Guinness World Record holder of being the world's most traveled man since 1983, having traveled over 15 million miles, including 718 flights on Concorde. We talk about what it's like to have traveled that much, to spend that much time in the sky. We also talk about his book, Sonic Boom, which I'll leave links to down in the show notes. I think you're really going to enjoy this episode with Fred Finn. There we go. Thanks very much for joining the podcast, Fred. I really appreciate it. You have a fascinating story and so many travels that I want to talk about. But first, if you give us a little bit of a background on where you grew up and sort of your early life before traveling.
Yeah, sure. What I used to do when I had a daytime job, I did international law and transfer of technology licensing. Today products are made under license all over the world. Pharmaceuticals, American pharmaceuticals are licensed in England and Swiss ones are licensed in America. That's what I did with third world and developing nations, because mainly what I licensed them to do, I was vice president of Hasbro. And Hasbro, now apart from toys, had educational equipment and writing materials. So I licensed third world countries to make their own, rather than spend the foreign exchange they didn't have. So because it was so new in the late 1960s and early 70s, it took me about 3 years to put a contract together. Because nobody had heard of it before, I had to work for the ministries like the Ministry of Labour, the Ministry of Technology, if they had one, Ministry of Finance, and how we would get paid for this technology, all under US law. And in those days, you could only give $25 away as a gift to somebody. You can imagine giving that away to the deputy minister or the deputy president or the CEO of a company. So when I was in Africa, we used to fly all these guys up to Hamburg and give them a good time. That was an educational trip. That was okay. So, yeah, but that's what I used to do. And it took me, I was flying around the world 11 months a year because they get so far along and I'd have to go back and do a bit more. Eventually, we'd sign a contract. It'd take 2.5 to 3 years to get right. And then they went away. So I would do a license in Kenya, for example, because it was Kenya shillings, they could do, or shillings, they could do Uganda and Tanzania. So not only could they manufacture for themselves, they could export to two other countries. So that was what I tried to do. And it worked okay until I could do it anymore. By which time, my travel had caught up with me because a certain aeroplane came along called Concorde in 1976. I was on the first flight out of Dulles on the 25th of May, 1976 to London, the return of the inaugural flight. And, people said it was an elite aircraft, it was a rock stars aircraft, or it was a company that owned AT&T. Well, I'm none of those. They put me down as an oil tycoon or oil exec because I worked. The truth of the matter is, I used to work on an oil tanker in my young days to do instead of national service. I could study while I was at sea. So this is what I did. And my first trip on an aeroplane was from London Blackbush Airport, which is about 20 minutes from Heathrow, on a DC-4B, which is like a DC-3 with 4 engines. And it took me 19 hours to get to Idlewild. And that was what it was all about then. Yeah, so 19 hours and 4 stops was my first Atlantic crossing. And as a young guy, here I am on an oil tanker coming to Bayonne and North Carolina, New Orleans, and Rio de Janeiro, Curacao, and Aruba. And I thought, wow, this is not a bad life. So this is how I started. But Concorde, when I started commuting, and now it was a tool. Now people say a very expensive tool maybe, but it wasn't so bad because I could catch a Concorde from Kennedy at 10 o'clock in the morning. I could land in London at 6 and be on a flight to Nairobi 2 hours later. So I could do that journey within 24 hours instead of now and then. Before Concorde, I'd have to come out the airport, That means checking out, checking baggage, going to a hotel, all the paraphernalia that you're well aware of, and check back in 24 hours later. So I guess the company, they weren't that good natured. They just said, you fly on Concorde, but it was a tool, and they kept me working more than sitting in the hotels having a good time. So that's my beginnings. Eventually, I sort of ran out of places I could license. I did it from 1977 until 1987. And then I stayed with the company as a consultant, but there was nothing more I could do. By which time, the travel, because of, when I'd done 150 flights on Concorde, I was met at the airport with a tow truck and a table and a bottle of champagne, and the stewardess served it. This is your 150th flight. Have a glass of champagne. That's how I started. I mean, I commuted across the Atlantic many times before Concorde, but then I was a nobody. I was a frequent flyer, and I've been a frequent flyer for nearly all my life. But it's been Concorde that started this ball rolling a lot more. I got asked by magazines to write travel tips. I appeared on the front of Executive Travel magazine, which became the most represented magazine cover. It was twice used in the Guinness Book, 86 and 96. And it keeps rolling. Even yesterday, I get an invite to St. Moritz in Switzerland to the 30-year-old car rally of Aston Martins, Jaguars, to be the special guest and the speaker and stay in a Hard Knock hotel, which is one of the best in the world. Would I mind doing it? Well, and as they get, no, of course I wouldn't mind doing it. It's especially in July, it's fantastic, St. Moritz, But this keeps rolling on. I became an honorary member of the Red Arrows display team. Because of that, I flew the very last flight of the Phantom F4 jet. Because of that, I drove in the British Grand Prix celebrity race at Silverstone, and it keeps going, and I love it, and I'm passionate. I'm like you. I'm passionate. I think we were both inoculated with aviation fuel, but it just keeps going. I found Concorde was a club. It was where you knew very rich people, very important people, that if I'd wanted to reach them on the ground would never have happened. But because I was entitled to be on Concorde, as they were, you met regular people. Paul McCartney, I used to meet quite regularly, draw funny faces. I became a very, very good friend of Johnny Cash and June Carter, because at one time I lived in Nashville for 2 years, and John and I used to fly up to New York together. He had an apartment on Central Park South, and we'd go out to a little rib place I used to know on 63rd and 3rd and have a good time. And Dolly Parton, I flew with her a lot. She used to tell lots of jokes. And this kept going. Muhammad Ali, we flew with him. Superwoman, we took to the pub after a flight once when we landed in London. And then I got very friendly with the crews because it was a small fleet. And I played this silly English game of cricket. I played cricket for them. I filled in for the captains doing lectures about kinetic friction and why Concorde grew in length when it flew. And I did that on the QE2. You get one way on the QE2 and one way on Concorde for half a Concorde fare. Wow. It was 5 days on the first class in the QE2. Wow, it was pretty terrific. So, yes, and I was over there 2 months ago because Concorde on Intrepid had been in Brooklyn Navy Dockyard for renovation and repaint, and we were there as an invite to cut the ribbon that it was back on the Intrepid aircraft carrier. So, and I lived in New York for 5 years. I lived in New Jersey, Bernardsville, Baskin Ridge, and I lived just outside of Nashville, and I'm a U.S. citizen as well.
So it's clear that you love traveling, right? So
absolutely, I love it. Look, I'm almost 85 years old, and I'm traveling for 66 years, and it's changed a lot. I don't know how long you've been traveling, but you'll have noticed the changes. I used to remember the good old days of travel when you had to dress properly to travel. In the good old days of travel with Pan American, if you didn't dress properly, you wouldn't get on a flight because they were strict. There was a strict dress code, like some restaurants, dining clubs. They're strict. Jeans, never in your life. Of course, there was no designer jeans then. It was like working things. Shorts that are cut off and no socks, definitely, no, not out of the question. So the best dining experience in the car was on Pan American in the air. When the 747 came out, they put a restaurant in the bubble. 2 tables of 2 and 2 of 4. And you sat there in your seat and the big menu. Now, all the flight attendants were trained in silver service at the Savoy Hotel in London, in silver service. Boy, it was good. And you get your menu, and they'd take your menu, your recipe, what you wanted to eat. And then about 45 minutes later to an hour, they'd come and say, would you follow us upstairs to your table? Since I was always traveling alone, I could find myself sitting to a very rich guy, an influential guy, or a nice lady. It depends. It worked. But the service, everything was prepared on board. It wasn't heated from ashore, everything. So the fillet of beef would run off your plate one end and it's medium rare the other. So this was the best dining. You were in a private dining club. But for what, 8, 12, 14 people? No, yeah, 10, 2 4s are 8, 2 10, 12 people cruising along at 35,000 feet. There's never been anything like it, even today. Wow. Well, Pan Am was the pioneer of most of the world's air routes at the time. And if it wasn't for Pan Am, there wouldn't have been a 747. You know, the one trip and the Boeing guy, they do it up on a napkin over dinner, and that's how it happened. Then they shook hands. Amazing. It wouldn't happen today, would it?
No.
So, you know, this keeps developing, and I've been a speaker at the Aviation Oscars, the Crystal Cabin Awards in Hamburg, and I've had 600 people as an audience, and people like Tim Clark, who runs Emirates. But I knew Tim Clark when he was at British Caledonian. So when you've been flying all these years, you get to know a lot of people. Most of the time, I'm going to funerals these days. I was at one on Monday that I knew somebody since 1956. But the Concorde guys, I go to the funerals of the pilots, the ones I know very well, and their wives even, sometime later. I got invited to a wedding of a flight attendant's daughter 2 years ago when I arrived in Edinburgh, and I live near London. You're giving her away. So this is a life. I go to dinner and find out I'm the speaker while I'm sitting at dinner. I'm excited with it, you know. Mm-hmm. I'm still passionate about it. I love it. And you're smiling because I can see you appreciate the passion because you've got it yourself.
Well, yeah, I mean, I mean, I love hearing those experiences. I love hearing I mean, I'm imagining like what it would be like to fly in the Concorde. And you kind of mentioned, I mean, did you have to dress up? You know, is there a certain protocol that had to be followed?
I think out of respect, I think the sort of people that flew on it, they did dress properly. I mean, I don't know about a few rock stars here and there, but the guy that Lou Grade at home and the guys that ran Exxon or AT&T, yes, I mean they would wear a suit. And I always wear a suit. At least when I don't wear a suit, I'd wear a jacket and trousers with a tie. I mean, a tie today is almost unheard of. But I find it's because of the generation. I find if I don't put a tie on to go to a business meeting, I'm missing something. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But Concorde was something very different. It was a very small fleet, and when I flew on it, Fred is with us today. So under the seat in front of me would be the bottle of Dom Perignon chilled before I got on a flight. And the captain of it stood at the door and he'd ask me, would you fly with us today? Or are you going to sit in your seat? And sometimes I sit in my seat because I'd have a journalist following me for a story. Or they'd sell my seat. They'd say, you have to sit in the flight deck today. I said, have you told the captain I'm going to be in his office? Well, no. I said, well, you better have, because I want my red wine. I'm not going to fly on Concorde because they had the best wine cellar you could ever imagine. So I'm definitely going to have some of that. And they allowed me. And I used to sit there with a headset on and talk to the captain. And one day, a guy said to me, when the captain said, your friend's coming the other way at 46 miles a minute closing. Do you want to say hello? So I spoke to my friend David Leaney, a captain, going the other way at 46 miles a minute, it's closing speed. I mean, this is incredible. Sometimes I have to pinch myself to know it actually happened.
Mhm.
Flying, the things I've done with flying. I mean, I took, when I flew the Red Arrows, they said, bring one of your celebrity guests. So I took Richard Branson. I took Richard Branson and his wife and two kids on their first safari because I go to Kenya. I've been to Kenya 600 times. Kenya is my favorite place on God's earth. I think Kenya's got everything that you could ever wish for. A mountain with you have to climb properly, not like the Pudding Bowl in Tanzania. It's on the equator, a few minutes away by private plane, which you usually use when you're on safari. The lake with about 3 million flamingo on it. A bit further off, a game park and gorgeous beaches. Sensational people, Kenyans. They're really, really nice. I know a guy since 1979. He said, I'm going to put a restaurant here. I said, you're mad. There's nothing, I can't see anything. But it was quite close to the Wilson Airport, the domestic airport. And he said, well, they'll be flying from here to the Highlands, here to the Masai Mara, here to the coast, here to there, everywhere. Well, he was right. And the restaurant's called Carnivore. You can guess what they sell. But they got up to 6,000 meals a week. It's one of the top 50 restaurants in the world. And my friend is a white Kenyan, but he trains the black Kenyans to be management. And they're so professional. One guy I cited as a waiter is now CEO of Tamarind Holdings, and this guy is now a billionaire. He's got the carnivore meals in all the shopping malls because it's barbecue, yeah, and stuff. And they've opened up in South Africa. So Kenya, man, I love it. It's just fantastic. My friend has got a game park there. It's about the size of Wales. And there's no fences. And you've got a lovely tent. It's got hot and cold running water, flush toilets, and hot showers. You can't see, there's not a building you can see, but they have it. But you can sit on your little patio with a nice glass of wine and watch the elephants. They walk right by. So it's not easy. It's nothing. I don't say everybody's perfect, but I do a Fred Finn safari and beach holiday with a spa. And I've known these people 30 or 40 years that own these places. And I auction them for charity. And we've got some pretty top people go there. But they all come back. They say, do you know everybody in Kenya? I said, no, I don't. But they said, well, where you went to, they treated us like we were coming home. And I spent all sorts of people to Kenya, royalty, Richard Branson and his kids. And you know what? They all go back. So if you ever, don't know if you've been to Kenya.
No, I haven't yet.
Mr. Anil, you're missing in your life. You got to go. And I'd be so happy to arrange a trip for you.
I would definitely take
you
you up
find
on
the
that.
airfare, sir, and I'll get you everything on the ground you want. There you are. And I'm not above BS. I don't do BS and I don't do compliments. I've been to so many dinners where the compliments are flying. Oh, they say, oh, nice to meet you. I'm too old for compliments. I tell the truth. So I've just made you a promise, and you can go to the bank and bank that one. You tell me when you want to go to Kenya. I might even come with you.
That would be great. No, I'll definitely take you up on that. I haven't
should
been,
do it.
so it's definitely on my list.
Sorry?
It's definitely on my list. I haven't been, so it's
Oh,
definitely.
my God. Once you've been there, you won't want to go to the rest. I'm serious. It's absolutely fantastic, man. I get off the plane there and I feel good. You can drive by the starlight,
Mhm.
and it's such a beautiful climate. You know, it's 75, 80 during the day. But at night time, they light a big log fire. When you go on a safari, not like South Africa, where they're very tame and overkill, but in Kenya, they're live. They're really live, and no fences. At night after dinner, They'd light a big fire, and you sit around having your nightcap. But the guard, Ascari, will walk you to your tent because he'll know if there's anything on the way that might want to have breakfast early, you know. But it's fantastic, man. It is absolutely. I
What
love it.
what was it like the very first time you went? Did you like nowadays we can research so much. I mean, you can it's almost like you've already been there before you go. I mean, how much did you know before?
Not a
How
lot.
Mhm.
I mean, I've been to every country in Sub-Sahara, but then I was a consultant at Ethiopian Airlines. Now, not like everybody else who flies in and out of Africa, Ethiopian flies every country twice a day. They're one of the safest airlines in the world, and they always fly the latest equipment because the guy that I worked with, Captain Mohammed, when it was a dictator there who was aligned with Russia or the Soviet Union in those days, he told him, if you want me to run it, I'm only going to run it with Boeing. And so he did. And he lived in New Jersey most of the time. But they used to build Boeing parts under license. The only place I've ever known that they did that. But the crews and the food in Ethiopia is really, really historic. It's brilliant. But I didn't know what to expect. I mean, I don't want to go back to Nigeria, for example. I've had Nigeria up to here. Enough is enough. But I didn't know what to expect. Even in Nigeria, which is a bit crummy, and quite so many scams. Even when you're getting through the airport, they ask you for your health certificate, which you don't need. And then they point out it was up there already. And when I say, come on, don't come. And then when I said, my chief is waiting, and if my bag's gone, you'll be in a bit of a bother. And then they put me in the car, and they say, beware of the touts. They're the biggest tout in the bloody world you're just talking to. But I used to think to myself, don't like it here. But then again, yes, I do, because I could be on a 9 to 5 job somewhere, typing, painting, fixing a car, doing figures, I don't know, and working in an office. And what I'm doing is 100% better than any of that. So even if I had my off days, it was better than on days somewhere stuck.
Uh, yeah, no, I mean, I, I completely understand that sentiment, right? It's even a bad experience in a different place is still something that's novel, right? It's something that's unexpected.
Absolutely, I know. Absolutely. You can turn it into something. I've
Mhm.
made many wrong turns in my life, but nobody wants to know about that. I do a lot of inspirational talks, and I tell people, you started off in the right way, as you did, with a nice smile.
Mhm.
And it does. You can't tell somebody off or have a fight with somebody when they're smiling at you. It's very difficult. So yeah, I just got on with it. One of the trips I did, I used to live in Canada, and they transferred me down. And the first job I had was a company called Napa. They're still in business, but very different than when I was there. I think 1962 or three. It was a long time ago. And the guy said, I was near the Iron Building in New York. The office was across the road. And he said, see that car down there? I said, it's like a dinky toy. It was an Oldsmobile Cutlass with European suspension. He said, that's your car. Here's a little pump, he said. I want you to show it to every hospitality provider, distributor, and every motor factor distributor in every major city in the United States. That's your job. I said, and when does that start? He said, tomorrow. And you got $400 a week in your bank account, and there's a credit card. And off I went. Took me 17 to 18 weeks. I tell you what, I saw America. I had to drive up the Rockies and out of the carburetor to get to the top, and then the other side go down. The experience of a young guy. Oh, Christ. If I found a lovely lady, I'd fly down the next weekend to wherever I was. Because you can't put it into words how good it is. I'm getting paid to do what I love.
And
It, it's just fantastic. And then the Concorde flights. I mean, come on, it was unreal. I did so many flights on Concorde. Um, I used to take the booze off for the crew. In one end, if it was open, they could pay 50 pence for it, which is less than $1. Um, but they couldn't take it ashore because of the customs. But I could get 10 bottles in my case. I had a very inflatable briefcase, and I didn't have to go. It didn't bother me. So we used to meet up in the pub. And on Christmas Day, British Airways never flied out of Heathrow. So I got stuck with Air France Concorde. I got so many offers to fly on French Concorde, come and stay a night in a Charles Sec Billy hotel and have a limousine and fly out the next day. I said, no, I fly Concorde because it's a tool and it's quicker, not to have a night out in Paris. But Christmas Day, I said, okay. So there was only 3 of us on the flight. And what happened? This guy said, I want to take out my guitar. This is boring, and we'll have a sing song. It's okay. And it was John Denver. And he played Country Road, one of my favorite songs of all time. What more could you want? Yeah. It just Buddy, you know the drummer, Buddy Rich.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I had him on a flight one day, and he was a bit nervous because we'd aborted takeoff. So he asked if he could sit next to me. So we're talking away, and ever such a nice guy. And he said he's going into London. I said, you're not going to get there till 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night. He said, and I'm out on a flight 8 o'clock in the morning. I said, well, I've got a suite at Heathrow with 2 bedrooms in it. You can share one if you want. He said, no problem. So he came and stayed with me overnight. Yeah. But it was because on Concorde, you were equal. Mm. And I mean, flying in the flight deck, oh, shit. I mean, come on, that was just amazing. Because Concorde, when it took off, it was like a Ferrari. You could feel the undercarriage. And of course, it was almost as long. It was only 12 feet shorter than a 747. But of course, much narrower. But the look of the plane was fantastic. The first flight I made on it, I didn't know much about it really. It wasn't my favorite. But the second time, they put me in seat 9A, the first flight. And that was my seat for 30, 40 years. I know 27 years, I think it was, in flighting. But now when I do a dinner under the wing of Concorde, everyone has a photograph of me sitting in my seat. But it was good because it's where they started the service from the back. So I got served first. One time I was going down to Singapore, and I knew the captain, and I was going to fly with this particular captain, and I couldn't catch the flight, but they break in Bahrain. They used to break, and another crew took it to Singapore. So he called me from Bahrain, and he said, a good job you didn't catch the flight, because somebody sat in your seat, and a woman was wheeled on in a wheelchair, and she stabbed him with a knife in the head. He said, but for the grace of God, went you. So, yeah, that was a lucky escape. I've been on an attempted hijacking. I've landed with the wheels up. And on the same day, because I got on another flight immediately, there was a bomb on board. We screwing. Well, they thought there was a bomb on board because I was flying around New York for an hour before we went anywhere. And they said, I told the flight attendant we'd either be gone or back by now. So there wasn't, but there was a debate whether we should fly or go back. And then I'm calling my chairman from Copenhagen in the morning instead of meeting him on Park Lane in New York. But yeah, I miss living in the States at a large extent. But what's going on now with this election? Oof, I don't know what's going to happen. I think democracy is threatened.
And I mean, throughout your travels, I mean, you've seen so much. You know, is there, like you mentioned the election, but is there a major shift you've seen either in travel or in people, or
Yeah.
or you know, are we just in the moment and things seem worse than they are? You know.
Well, I've just seen Iberia. They've took over an Airbus 321 LXR, and they're going to use it between Madrid and Boston. That's a 321 Airbus. It's a small little plane. I mean, it's not much bigger than some private planes. But who's going to want to fly across the Atlantic in that? And they cannot duplicate what a 777 will be or a Dreamliner. I like the Dreamliner. I don't like it because it takes so long, though. I mean, it's 7 or 8 hours going across the Atlantic. The fastest crossing I did was 2 hours and 55 minutes from New York. Sometimes in the winter, they would let you go supersonic straight away from Kennedy. Once you got over the water, just out on Long Island Sound, you were gone.
And is there something you notice, as a passenger when you
Well,
hit
I
that?
would be on that particular day. I was in the flight deck, and it was a United Airlines flight, and he said, "Concorde, let us see what we do." And we actually went underneath him like this to take off. Yeah, it was such an amazing aeroplane. I used to do some lectures on it sometimes, and the air at 1,400 miles an hour, supersonic, has to slow down to 550 to enter the engine. And it does that by two baffles like this. In 11 feet, it slows it down 1,000 miles an hour. Sometimes that baffle doesn't work. And when it doesn't, the air hits the engine and comes back again. And it goes with an enormous bang. And it makes you jump. But it's not dangerous, but it probably buggered that engine up anyway. But somebody said to me, "Did you arrange that?" I said, "Not really." And I keep meeting people. Today, I had a flight attendant with me called Julie Reynolds on her very first flight. 3 weeks ago, I had a reception on the BOAC, the flagship up in Manchester, to launch my book. And she was on standby in London. 47 years later, she's still flying. And she crashed my party with a bottle of champagne. And that's Concorde. We still know each other. We still see each other. Because there was less Concorde pilots than there were astronauts.
Wow.
And when you flew, the Concorde, when you took off, they had the reheats to get you going. And then when you got over the water, they went from 199 to 1.7 Mach. And Concorde was in supercruise from 39,000 feet to 60,000 feet. It was the most perfect aeroplane. But if you looked off, it was black. You're on the edge of space. NASA says over 50,000 feet, you're an astronaut. And if you look down, you could see 700 miles. You could see the curvature of the Earth. And this time of the year, just in about an hour's time, I would take off from London. It's dark. But you go faster than the rotation of the Earth and see the sun come up from the west and land in New York in daytime. This is Concorde and what it did. It was a dream. And turbulence, never. I've heard people say you could feel it with every item in your body. It held you back in the seat. It was a thrust. And when they put it on the afterburners, all you felt was a touch on the shoulder. It never spilt a drop of my champagne. Never. It was something. It was very special. And even now going back to the old way, yeah, it's what it is. But I get a buzz out of going to airports still. It's not like it used to be. There's too many crowds. I mean, coming into New York, even with a gold card and all the trimmings I get, you're still in a bloody great queue for hours. There's maybe only two people working. And I'm coming in on a British Airways flight, which is supposed to have their own terminal. But they don't care.
I
I come with an American passport. and you're waiting for hours, man, to get through.
Is there
Don't give a
something that
toss.
you've learned, like in terms of getting through the airport quicker, or
Sure.
getting on a plane? It,
Well, yeah, I do. I mean, for example, now we've gone back to the old-fashioned way. You can't you can't carry more than 100 cc's of liquids. Even I had an almost empty toothbrush. There was one I was going to clean my teeth with it that night and throw it away. They took it away from me. I said, no, it can actually hold. I said, but you can see it's empty. No, we can't let it through. I said, that's stupid. I said, the trouble is I cannot bring more than 100. There's only 25 in here. But uh, I think sometimes you put people in a uniform at an airport and then you're tired. You're going to do what they tell you,
yeah.
whether you like it or not. I mean, it goes to a lot of people's heads. It doesn't matter whether it's in USA or where it is. Somebody's got a uniform on, they're in charge. You get all these lines, the Z, where you keep up and down, up and down. But when there's nobody around, they still want you to wake. I lifted up and walked through. Guy said, you can't do that. I said, I'm sorry, I just did. I said, you've got to be an idiot if you think I'm going to walk all these miles and there's absolutely no one here. So he started to get funny, and the immigration officer, came out and said, what's the problem? She said, I heard the conversation. She said, you should go and attend the job somewhere else, she said, and let Mr. Finn through. So that's what they did. But I don't normally fall out with people. But sometimes people are just stupid. They're bossy for the sake of it,
Yeah,
to prove who they are.
the airport experience is not
Not
always
what it used to
fun.
be.
Yeah. There's the sort of relief that you get when you get to your gate, or you just get past security, that you can kind of relax. It's a very nice feeling, but everything leading up to that can be just
It's a joke.
such, yeah, is a very stressful. Um, could you tell that that the Concorde was going to end? I mean, did you see less people using it, or were there
It should
signs?
never have ended. I know it should never have ended. It was engineered out the sky by the French
Mhm.
after the crash, which was no reflection on Concorde. It was 5 human errors that made that. Do you know this? 5 human errors. Well, first off, there was a load of Germans coming to New York to join a cruise ship, so the bags were heavy. 29 bags were on the aircraft without being on the manifest. They overloaded the fuel tanks, so the plane was 5 tons overweight. Now, when you overload the fuel tanks, British Airways used to overload to go to Barbados, but you have to have room for the fuel to move. If it doesn't, it implodes. So that's not the pilot's license to fly was expired. He was told to go around to another runway. He said, no, I'm in a hurry. So it starts off. Now a spacer on the front wheel dropped off because the plane had been in service 3 flights before. So you could see the flight going down the runway, but that punctured the tire. The tire was rotating because they're smaller than normal aircraft, and zipping around, it hit the fuel tank. It didn't puncture, it imploded, and it was on fire because the afterburners were on. And you can stand in aviation for a drop of match and it won't burn, but put it into like afterburners with all that pressure. So it was on fire. So you've got all these things going on. And had that plane got up to about 1,000 feet, then the engineer turned off the engine, it would have blown out and they could have landed. But no, that engineer turned off the engine without the captain's consent, without command. The minute he did that, it was doomed. So all of these things went on. And Air France had another near miss coming from US. They were told to land. There was a fuel leak. And they said they would get to Shannon. But in the end, they had to turn back and they landed on fumes. If they had to go around anywhere, it wouldn't have made it. It'd have been a pretty quick submarine.
Hmm.
But so the French, of course, never made any money with Concorde. First off, Paris is not a financial centre. Secondly, it takes longer to get supersonic. And third, the British Airways service on Concorde was better. You shouldn't have thought it might be. Even the cuisine was better because it was the most profitable aircraft that British Airways had. It made £500 million of raw profit in the 27 years. Also, they did all these charter flights to the Bay of Biscay for 2 hours. People got to go supersonic. You could go for lunch to the pyramids. You could go to play golf in Barbados in the morning and come back in the evening. And this is why it became so popular. The French didn't do any of that. So when it came to after the crash, people they lined the tanks with the same stuff they put in racing cars, Formula One cars. Quite a job for somebody to get in those tanks. They had to be very small, but they lined the tanks. But British Airways did up the whole of the interior. New seats. The seats cost £14,000 a pair because they were lighter and built by Conran. They were super Ferrari seats, if you will, and so comfortable. They altered the Mach meter. They put new toilets in like the Hilton Hotel has, and they did the colours when you change the Mach. They spent 2 million on 10 million altogether on 5 aircraft. The other 2 they kept for spare parts. So they were ready to fly to 2010. And apparently the CEO of Air France called the CEO, an Australian guy, said, "We're not flying anymore. But you can't either." Well, that's not the right way. So British Airways went to a meeting in Paris with their plans to fly for another 5 years. The contract said if either airline wanted to stop flying, the other could pick up the maintenance charges. So British Airways was going to pick up the maintenance charges for Air France, which was $40 million. But what happened was they doubled it. And that's the point when 5 perfectly beautiful airplanes, all done up, ready to fly for the next 7 years, went to a museum. Airbus didn't want it anymore. It was a small fleet, 7 aircraft really, it would have been. And they didn't want to, or 5 aircraft actually then. They couldn't be bothered. They were more interested with the Airbus A380. And the French didn't want any more things that may have got them for manslaughter. So that's what it is. The CEO of British Airways should have walked out that room and said, "You're in breach of contract," and took it to court because they'd have won. But they didn't. And that's what happened to Concorde. And you see that aeroplane today, it looks like it's built tomorrow. It's such a beautiful aeroplane, man. And it was built without computers. And it was built in meters on one side of the channel and feet and inches on the other, and they all fit together. It grew about 12 inches in flight. Between the engineer's panel and the bulkhead, you could put some of them did. They put a captain's hat in there when it was supersonic and held it there when it went down, and it was still there because it closed up. That's because the prong on the nose of Concorde was like a speedometer. When it reached 125, the body of Concorde was 100 degrees. And it couldn't go much hotter because it was made out of man-made materials. Mm-hmm. And you didn't want it. I wanted how hot it was one day. So the little hole in the door, I stuck my finger in, and it burnt my bloody finger real quick. Yeah, but I didn't. I just tried it out. So yes, we went back 2,000 years then, and these amazing aircraft. The one in Manchester that still drops. I spoke at a dinner for about 300 people on the Concorde, and they dropped the nose. They do a tour. Aston Martin, they built 10 aeroplanes, 10 Aston Martin DBS Super League, Concorde edition. Each had, when you pulled the visor down, it was a Concorde visor. And it would like the heads up. Or when you open the door, it was a Concorde door. There was a piece of metal of Concorde in each one. So they were rare. So I would talk at some of these dinners where they'd all be lined up from BOAA to BOAG. And the people there, well, we want to sit in the seat. Our wife wants to sit in the seat next to you. Oh, okay. So this is the fame, you know. I got it. I just did the same. I did it just 3 nights ago. I was in Bristol with Alpha Foxtrot, and all those people wanted me to sign a book for them, but they wanted to get the book handed to them from my seat on Concorde. So yes, I'm a normal guy, you know, that's done a lot of things that everybody might want to wish they did or could, and I've been lucky enough to do it. I'm not an egotist. I'm not racist. I can't afford to be, can I? Look at what I've done. If I was a racist, I would have done half of it. And I'm not arrogant. So I get along with people, and I enjoy, like we're talking. I'm sorry, I'm doing most of the talking. I'm sorry.
No, that's how this is set up. Yeah, no, this is
but I'm enjoying it, you see, because it's pleasurable, and I know most people without. And now this is a bit big-headed, but I know a lot of people are getting enjoyment from my experiences, and that's why I wrote that book, Sonic Boom.
Yeah.
Have you got a copy of it?
I do. Yeah, I have an electronic copy. Yeah.
Did you buy one, or have you got a PDF one?
Yeah, just bought the electronic version.
Okay, well, when I see you, I'll sign one and give it to you, okay?
Sure.
I might be over in New York to do a book launch in January. I'm certainly going back to Barbados in January because there's a Concorde there, and they want to turn it into something to do with tourism.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sort of a kind of a legend of a Concorde, you know. It's what it is. But I'm still traveling. I've traveled on some of the weirdest aeroplanes, some strata cruises where the lounge was downstairs, and a Constellation. That was probably the first pressurized aircraft, and it could fly at 12 to 15,000 feet above the turbulence, they used to say. Well, you can tell that to Singapore Airlines, who had that terrible bust up with a Singapore Airlines flight of 35,000 feet. But Concorde never got the turbulence. Never. Not on a flight that I was on anyway.
There are all these rumors that, every few years there's rumors that it's coming back. So
never going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's never going to happen because Airbus won't grant us airworthy certificate. And to make sure it didn't, they decommissioned those aircraft within 30 minutes of landing. They took all the oil out of it.
Mm.
So they're now connected, and they're all connected up to the ground power now. And all the electronics have been altered so you can drop the nose. It couldn't work on the ground on its own power. So they've been totally altered. The cabin lights work now, the Mach meter works, the cockpit lights are all working, and they drop the nose. They're never going to fly. No. They've talked about the one at the airport. There's one at Heathrow. It's the most watched thing at Heathrow. When you see it, it looks like it's out tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but they're going to put it the guy the wheel on the River Thames by the Houses Apart. No, it's not going to happen. And boom, now we got boom. I'm not going to fly on an aircraft got boom anyway, but I don't think this aircraft's ever going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. 10, 12 years ago, they invited me to go to Denver to their first launch. And I said to go, how much you paying me to go 4 days to stay in Denver? Oh, we don't have any budget. So I said, story of my life. I can't come there and work for you for nothing. I said, but because it's what you're trying to do, I'll support it, but you take care of my travel. So then they wrote to me and said, we can only do an economy ticket. I said, you know what? I'm not going to fly all the way to Denver, 11 hours, to come and work for you for free in economy. I said, so I'll arrange my own travel. So I got a standard ticket with a car and a hotel for less than a standard ticket. I said, if you pay for that, then I'll be on the way. We'll pay you when you get here. I said, no, you won't, because I'm not coming. And the guy, I'm not. I've got so many letdowns for it. I wouldn't do it. But The Japanese bought an option when it had 3 engines. American and United bought an option when it's got 4 engines. And they're tootling around in this pratty little plane that, like a fighter. It doesn't bear any relationship to what supersonic's going to do. But they had their flight deck here at Farnborough Air Show, and they got a few ex-Concorde captains. Of course, it's bloody super nice. Microsoft builds flight decks like you wouldn't believe, but it ain't going to make an aeroplane fly. They don't have a fuselage. They don't have engine. The engine manufacturers don't want to give them any engines. Rolls-Royce was the last one to bail out because there's no after-sales. And also, this guy is going to run into the same problem that British Airways did. It can't fly over the land because of the sonic boom. If they start to steal all the passengers, if it ever flies, and they're taking 58, 60 people in business class only, what's the other airlines going to do that don't buy this thing? They're going to sit there and watch what happened with Concorde. The first was 40 seats, first class. The rest was 60 Y seats. There wasn't any business class then. But once the other airlines, they're going to lose 240 seats a day to people who only have to fly 3.25 hours instead of 7 or 8. No way. They said, no, it's not going to happen. And what happened, they made Concorde R class, which was 20% above first class. Now, this guy's going to run into the same problem, but he's going to fly a commercial airplane in 2030. It's almost 25. That's 5 years. Concorde had 2 prototypes that were flying around the world for 5 years testing it before it ever flew commercially. They haven't got aircraft yet. It's going to cost them billions to build the engines. I tell you what, you remember DeLorean?
Mm-hmm.
The cars, at least as they put some on the road, I don't think you're going to see a boom jet flying. And I saw yesterday in the aviation news that the hypersonic engines had just been approved for working, and you could see by 2035 a hypersonic taking off with a jet engine and turned into the hypersonic, take an hour to go to New York from London. I mean, there was talk about that years ago before Concorde, that one day there'd be a plane that went up into the atmosphere, waited there for the Earth to turn around and then land. And this hypersonic's coming. The engines are there already. It's a rocket jet engine. And what this little guy Boom going to do? He doesn't have this sort of money. And if the engine manufacturer thought there was even if he could sell 50, it's only 50 engines, plus maybe another 50. When they build a Boeing or an Airbus, they're selling hundreds. So yeah. It's not going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen. Okay. I think the best chance is that NASA, Lockheed, have got this FB-49. It's a plane with a 9-foot nose. And that, at the moment, is test flying over land in America at 1.4 Mach. And it's just like a quality car door closing, like that. So that'll pass the federal government test for flying over land. Once they can do that, they can build an aircraft. Now, NASA know how to build, how to fly fast, and Lockheed built the SR-71 and the Lockheed TriStar, so they've got bags of experience. So 1.4 over land, Mach 3 can happen over the sea. Mm-hmm. So once you can fly New York, Los Angeles, and then off to Tokyo, or wherever you want to go, Australia, and that'll work. If it ever happens, I think the hypersonic will come first. Hydrogen plane is coming next. They were testing an EasyJet here with a hydrogen engine the other day, with hydrogen fuel, and it's green. Well, hydrogen cars. Toyota's got hydrogen cars out already. Hydrogen will be at the pumps rather than the electric car. I wouldn't have an electric car. The lithium they put into those batteries, they're catching fire at the airports. Amsterdam, was it Amsterdam last week? 100 cars got burnt up at the airport in the parking because the battery of 2 electric cars caught fire. And of course, that's what happens with the Dreamliner when it first started flying. The batteries overheated. They've solved that problem, but the making of it. What happens when all these batteries run out? Like on a Tesla, 80 grand for a new one. People will dump the car and buy another one. It'll be cheaper.
Well, I think we would all like faster flights. I hope we
I
see
think
it
so.
happen. Um, just the reduce the amount of time that you're in the sky. 8, 10 hours, make it at least half would be great. Um, so I guess we'll have to wait and see and hope.
I think it's going to happen, but not with Boom Boom. I don't think it's going to happen. Now, you see, they said that people ask me today about jet lag. I don't get jet lag because I don't believe it exists. You didn't get it with a propeller aeroplane, and you didn't get it with Concorde, yet you went through the same time zones. And I believe it's to do with dehydration. Now, the proper prop planes, the air didn't come through the engines. In the jets, it came through the engine, it was baked, which made it even worse. But you take an average family from London or in England, the night before they're going to come to Florida, the night before they're packing, well is the bag going to be over heavy? What about the liquids? Will the car show up in the morning? Oh, it's already late. Oh, the guy take the dog. It's already late to bed. In the morning, where will the car come, or will they make it with their car? By the time they get to the airport, they're exhausted. Then you've got to go through all the security, and then find the gate and have a 10-hour flight with this thing. So I wrote the thing of how to overcome so-called jet. I think jet lag. Flight attendants are going to hate me now. I think they dreamed up jet lag so they could get extra layovers. Because they used to. Concorde used to have layovers of 4 days when it first started. So the crew, one flight every 4 days. But then they changed it to a short haul fleet because the girls could fly to Pisa or Madrid and fly to New York. It's only 3 hours. Yeah, so that's what happened.
Well,
so I don't believe in jet lag at all.
And you're definitely an expert on flying. I mean, you've been in the sky more than anyone. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I will leave links to where everybody can find the book and can also read more and find out more. I mean, the amount of time that you spent.
You could buy the actual book if you want it on Amazon. You can do that, and when I see you, I'll take you out to dinner for what it costs you. All right?
That sounds good.
No, I like to do that. We can meet up in New York or something. Okay?
I'll take you up on that. Yeah, that sounds good.
I'm a member of a Harvard club, so we can go to the Harvard club and have lunch. It's quite nice there. Or the restaurants I used to go to all these years ago when I lived in New York, they're not in business anymore. But I've enjoyed talking with you, and thank you for your time. And I look forward to seeing you.
Thanks, Fred, for being a guest on the podcast. And thank all of you for listening and watching. Wherever you're listening to podcasts, make sure you give this a 5-star rating and a review. Helps us get the word about the show out. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit the like and subscribe buttons. I'll have new videos for you every week. Thanks again for listening. Thanks again for watching. And I'll see you in the next one.